Welcome in to the Illini Inquirer Podcast. It's Jeremy Werner and Joey Wagner, and we are a couple of training camp practices in, and we've decided we take some of your questions. We've talked all about this team, what it could be. We will have our position previews coming up, but Joey, we figured why not listen to the people? Let's try to answer their questions as best we can. I do want to throw out the caveat. We don't get a lot of access to practice. That's not us complaining. Of course, I would like to be in there a little bit more, but this is more just based on what we've heard and based on what we've talked to people about so far. So haven't seen a lot, won't get to see a lot. It's part of college football nowadays, these coaches shutting these things down. But I do think we have a lot of thoughts on these questions. So we appreciate everyone getting back to us with these.
Yeah, it's nice to have someone else pose the questions rather than you and I preparing a podcast, trying to decide what we want to talk about. It's a nice break and it gets us thinking about stuff that maybe we wouldn't have thought to bring up.
Yeah, and people went deep. They've got some deep cuts on here that I'm excited about. But first of all, we are resting up, just to let people know, for our 2028 trip to Vegas already. The Big Ten tournament for men's basketball is heading to Vegas in 2028. Women's basketball in 2027. They will go between Indy and Chicago for the next couple years. But figured this is going to happen, Joey. And I don't disagree with the Big Ten going to Vegas. LA, I probably would have had more of an issue with, just cost-wise. I don't think a lot of people would have made that trip. As you know, LA is tough to get around. Vegas, you cannot say that. Pretty easy, pretty great destination. I think they will get more fan bases out to Vegas than they will to Minneapolis last year. So I love it in Indy. I think it could be in Indy every year. I will not complain about going to Vegas.
No, I'm glad it's 2028. Gives me a little time to grow up. Going to Vegas with you and Piper is not something I think would be good for me right now. I've never been to Vegas either, so that'll be
wow.
I know.
Wow, it's a different kind of thing.
You might remember sending me to Michigan a couple years ago when you and Piper enjoyed the sweet Vegas sun.
That's true. Knowing how much fun we've had in places like Omaha and Des Moines, I would just say get ready, Joey. It's a different kind of. I can't wait to get there, and then in 36 hours later, you're like, get me the hell out of here. But it's you're
going to be having to explain to people why the Inquirer credit card bought a bunch of Liquid IV and Pedialyte for the Big Ten tournament.
That's all right. Looking forward to that. But let's just dive right into these questions. And I started with Woodsy Moose, who said, what starting position battle is under the radar? I figured that's a great place to start, Joey, is the training camp is a competition, right? Like the two deep is getting sorted out. Who's going to play? Who's going to be next up to play? I think those are the most important questions. So I'll give this one to you. What starting position battle is going under the radar right now?
We should say there really aren't many, at least by our read, true position like starter battles right now. At least the way that we've kind of observed and talked and learned about this depth chart. So I would say the one that's probably the most up in the air is that slot, that nickel corner spot between, we think the main players here, Tyler Strain and Tory Cox, the Ohio transfer, because Xavier Scott, who'd started those games last year, is, at least the way we understand it, moving outside opposite Terrence Brooks, where he's had some experience. So I think that one, I don't really know if it's under the radar, but I think that's the one I've got my eyes on the most here through fall camp.
Yeah, it's kind of a roster that with the transfer additions, I think we kind of know how these guys slot in. Like there's some rotation battles I'm interested. Like how many reps does Alex Bray get compared to an Ezekiel Holmes or a Gentle Hunt? Like those kind of things. But we know those guys are all going to play. I would say my two under the radar ones are one, the slot, even though that's not under the radar and that, hey, Hank Beatty, Kenari Wilcher, and Mario Sanders, the JUCO All-American, are all competing for that spot. The underrated part of it, Joey, and you've been hitting at this for a long time, and you've hit on it, and I'm glad you have, Zakari Franklin could play the slot. So if Malik Elzy and Pat Bryant are your top three with Zakari Franklin, then why not start those three? And Zakari Franklin has played the slot before. Pat Bryant has continued to talk about how he likes to be versatile. So that's a little underrated to me is, hey, start your best three wide receivers. And if LZ is better than those other two or any of the slots, not that the slots won't play, but you could see those guys start. My other one, can I say kicker? Like Ethan Maxolski.
That open practice got you thinking, didn't it, on Monday night?
Well, he's a former All-American kicker. So is David Alano. So they add this Texas A&M transfer kicker as a walk-on. You think, oh, just insurance. they want to push David Olano too. I think this is David Olano's job, but I don't think Illinois wanted him to just walk into it without a little pressure in camp, to feel that pressure that he'll feel during a game day. So I think it was good that David Olano got his feet wet a little bit last year on the kickoffs. I could see Moczolski having that job this year, but just on field goals, like Moczolski, we saw in one practice, looked pretty good, has a big leg. David Olano's really good too. So I feel good about that position regardless of who it is. But I do think it's a little under the radar that there is a competition there, Joey.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, and it's kind of hard, as you know, when you're on the side to see how many of those kicks are like the ones that are really, really good are pretty obvious, or really bad are pretty obvious. I think Brett Bielema was talking when Ethan, I'm going to call him Ethan M because pronunciation's a tough one. I think he said this is a perfect day. Like he was going for a perfect day. And I think that was in the neighborhood, it's in my notes somewhere, like 50 plus yards or right at 50. So it seems to me like that's a pretty quick early impression. So I like that call. I like bringing that up because I think there's a way those two could split duties too. Maybe one handles kickoff, one handles field goals, PATs, if that's what it comes down to. Before we move on, you mentioned wide receiver. If I set the odds at 35%, would you take over under the first snap where three wide receivers are LZ, Bryant, and Franklin?
That's a pretty good number. I still feel good about Kenari Wilcher because they do need speed. And I think Zakari Franklin has a speed element. But if it's Pat Bryant, Malik Elzy, and Zakari Franklin, I'm telling my defense they might run the ball here. So that would probably be my biggest tell, would be that. I think Zakari gives you a little bit more flexibility. Kenari, just the ability to throw that screen pass. Not that Franklin or Bryant couldn't, but I just think you do need another speed element. But I do think you're going to see snaps where Bryant and Franklin are in that slot at times.
Absolutely. I think they've kind of hinted at it a little bit with their versatility, and it's something that if you just look at the numbers, it's very much on the table. The amount of which they do that's going to be something to really monitor this year, and if it hits, then you go back to it because those are three of your most talented options in the room.
Let's go right into it. ZJY asks, who ends up being the third receiver behind Bryant and Franklin? Who you got, Joe?
This is a battle, really, by my read, I think, for Kenari Wilcher and Malik Elzy. I'll lean towards Wilcher because I can see a clearer path to a ton of snaps for him if they don't like the combination of one of Bryant or Franklin in the slot. I think I think Frank. It's a long day, Jeremy Werner. I think Wilcher makes a lot of sense there because of his speed. And Hank Beatty's reliable. That's been the story with him. Good hands, good route runner, kind of Donnie Navarro-like to me. But the speed that Wilcher can bring to the field, I think would open the door for him to get a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, I don't want to overlook Mario Sanders. Talking with Tank Wright, and people miss that. I think that's a wealth of information from the strength and conditioning coach with our Q&A over the weekend. But he's really fast, and he's got a little bit of a strength element that I think went under the radar a little bit with Isaiah Williams. He had a strength element to his game, being able to break tackles, being able to be a goal line kind of guy. I thought he was one of the best goal line players, even though that's kind of weird. You're one of your smallest guys on the team. But I think Mario Sanders will be interesting, but he was just nicked up all of spring, so we really didn't get to see him. And I think Kenari Wilcher and Hank Beatty just have kind of the head start on him. But he's a guy that could be in the mix at some point. But I would go with Wilcher, but Wilcher and Elzy are both going to play. And the one thing I keep coming back to is the addition of Franklin just eases the pressure on those guys so much. The fact that if you didn't add Zakari Franklin, you'd be counting on Kenari Wilcher and Malik Elzy to combine for at least 1,100 yards. And that's a big risk. Like, I am high on their talent, but now those guys can kind of be complementary pieces. One of them will have to make a big impact. Like Pat Bryant is the third guy, had 500 yards and 7 touchdowns last year, but it just eases the pressure and amps up the competition behind them. So just Zakari Franklin's impact on that receiver room, just being able to plug and play him, and they are excited about what Franklin can do based on what they've seen here early on. I just think that addition was so huge just for that entire receiver room. Otherwise, you had huge questions replacing Casey Washington and Isaiah Williams.
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of other wide receiver questions in the thing. So I just want to bring up, like, the buzz for Franklin is slowly starting to build. It was a little more, the expectations were a little more tempered early on when he got here. Now you're starting to see or hear some of those reps in fall camp, and kind of looks like the dude who's the active leader in receiving yards, right? Who's very smart. That was a word that was thrown around that we had heard. Very, very smart. And I know the breakdown that we had when he committed was pretty spot on with not the biggest, not the fastest. And when we brought that up kind of around people we trust, they said, well, he's really smart. And there's value of being a 6-year guy in college football and understanding how all of that gets played. So that buzz is starting to pick up a little bit more. And it feels like we've kind of dialed that back, because it was dialed back to us early on. And now I think by the time week 3 of fall camp rolls around, that's going to start getting a little louder and louder.
Yeah, the two words that come up with me are smooth and savvy. He is so fluid in and out of his breaks, just that route runner, like that veteran route runner that you know can get open, find a way to get open, knows how to set up his defenders, and then has great hands. But he's also got a little bit of size. He's 6'1", about 185 now. Tank said he's gained about 6 pounds in the month that he's been here. And then he's got enough speed. It's not burner speed like a Wilcher, but it's more than Pat Bryant or Malik Elsie. So I just think that kind of skill set is huge for this team. All right, let's go to Brett Zielema. Put out of Chase Canada, Jaheim Clark, and Caleb Patterson. Who has the edge at that third cornerback spot? This would be third in the outside perimeter cornerback, because we expect Xavier Scott and Terrence Brooks to be the starters there. We'd expect Tyler Strain and kind of Tory Cox probably to compete for that nickel spot. But I think Tyler Strain is the clear front runner there going into camp. So this would be more the backup top outside corner, Joe. Who you got, Canada, Clark, or Patterson?
This is one of the spots that we've known the names, so I'm kind of in the dark about how this thing shakes out among the three. I will say we've heard Caleb Patterson's name quite a bit here. And remember back when they landed him, that was a pretty, I liked what he had when they got him out of junior college last offseason. He needed time, obviously. You'll go back to the Iowa game. It wasn't very pretty. I think it was a pretty costly mistake in the fourth quarter there that hurt them. But he's really athletic. He's really physical. He's really long. He's a name that just pops up a little bit and kind of, he's older, right? He went to JUCO for a little bit. I think he could be the guy, but I just want to stress, I don't know. I haven't gotten a great feel for how that's kind of sorting itself out through the summer and really the first 2 practices.
I love the measurables. He was a top 50 JUCO prospect, and I liked the take, right? Like you talked about, did they reach on some JUCOs? They rely on too many JUCOs. Caleb Patterson, I just don't think was quite ready last year to be the player that they needed him to be on that team. But he could be this year. He's still a long-term piece. He redshirted last year. So he's still got 3 years of eligibility left for this team. So I still think he can make a big impact. And you're right. We're hearing Tank Wright told me he was the fastest of the defensive backs at 6'1", 185 pounds. And he's really long. He's got a plus wingspan. So I would imagine it's about 6'3", 6'4" at the very least. So the tools are there. It's just we haven't seen the football player a lot. And the one time we saw him against Iowa, it wasn't great. Saw him a little bit in the spring game, but he's a guy that you need to take a leap. Chase Canada, good tools. I think he's got some versatility. He can play that slot position or outside corner. Jaheim Clark was one of my favorite prospects in that class. He's kind of got that tenacity, length, really fast player. But kind of those Florida cornerbacks that they have gotten that, have been feisty. He's got that in his film. So he played on special teams last year and was a good special teamer. I can see him being a solid backup. That's the difference of, throwing out Jaheim Clark, throwing out Zach Toby last year. Those guys just weren't ready for that. Caleb Patterson just wasn't ready for that. Now, a year in the system, Joey, a year with Tank Wright, I think those guys can take a step forward. And adding Terrence Brooks means they don't have to be the starter. They can be the guy who's the next man up. So it's a fascinating question. And it's really, these are the competitions I'm most interested in training camp, because at some point, one of these guys is going to start a game this year, right? And they have to perform and at least be solid. That hurt them last year when those guys had to come in. Toby had a good game against Florida Atlantic, but then it kind of went downhill from there. They need these guys to come in when there's inevitably an injury to produce. And that's going to be fascinating to see how a battle like this for that third spot, who's going to be a starter potentially in November, how it comes about.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, you wouldn't hate to have a junior sitting there waiting, ready, guy who's kind of been around. It's not really the case. Chase Canada's obviously got some JUCO experience, but yeah, that's
Tory Cox. Maybe that's Tory Cox, right? I mean, and seeing
Right.
Tory close up the first time, he is very short. Like he is a short Big Ten corner. They list him at 5'9". He's probably 5'8", right? So he's shorter. I expect him to kind of be better at that nickel, but maybe Chase Canada is better at nickel, and maybe Tory Cox can be out there on an island. So that is why I like the Tory Cox addition. Is it did give you, Joey, some experience. It's just, can he be the outside guy? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think when we start thinking of short corners at Illinois and you think of that Wisconsin play with Will Pauling in the end zone last year, like kind of have a little hesitation because
Donovan
there's some
McCauley.
Yeah, that was against Nicholson, right? If I'm not, I just write down that visitor sideline time over. Yeah, that was a tough one.
All right, so Wiki, do you think the starting O-line week 1 will be the same week 12, barring injuries? That is a big qualifier at the end, but I think yes. I think the front five, the first five, has established itself. Now, that doesn't mean there's not a competition, but I do think J.C. Davis is no doubt the starting left tackle. I do think Chrystler is the no doubt starting right guard, and Josh Kreutz is no doubt starting center. And I think very, very likely Josh Gesky is the starting left guard, and very, very likely Melvin Priestley is the starting right tackle. Now, if Brandon Henderson has a great camp, or Hunter Whitenack, or Kevin Wigginton, or whoever it is has a great camp, maybe they can push them. But I think they've kind of established themselves through the spring. And I think what Illinois wants is for that group to grow with their camaraderie, grow with, gelling as a unit. And it sounds like they like where that group is at in that regard. So I think that's the ideal. But of course, Joey, you want to have a backup plan, and they have more backup plans in that 2 deep this year than they had last year.
Yeah, I do think that's the ideal. I think when you look at, okay, what could change that? If you were to hypothetically talk about what could possibly change week 8, 9 into week 12, does Melvin Priestley adjust to the Big Ten as well as you would hope? Can they coach those penalties out of him? He had 24 last year. They like a lot of what he's done. There's still a little bit of a rawness to him. Does he struggle? Does Brandon Henderson really push him? I don't know that that'll be the case, but if you're talking what could change it, that could change it. What could change, let's say, left guard? Does Kevin Wigginton start games in the Big Ten? Does he kind of settle in and really make a push to Josh Gesky if Gesky doesn't take that next step? He was serviceable last year. He really was. I think there's still reason to believe he can grow. He's really powerful. He's really strong. But like we're talking really about two positions that could swap this whole thing up. And I think those are it. And, or Des Schuster, right? Like there's options. It's not just Kevin Wigginton. It's not just necessarily if Josh Gesky were to struggle. It's just Des Schuster is a guy who they thought could be a starter last year. Obviously, he had some medical issues early on that stopped that. But could he kind of catch fire, figure it all out, and really push one of those guys? I don't think that'll be the case, Jeremy, but there are options now. Hunter Whitenack, I mean, he's played valuable snaps. He went up against Chop Robinson last year. That's something they bring up. Like, we're not really talking a lot about him because you look at what else they've got. So there's options there. I'm not saying this is the top fourth of the Big Ten offensive line, but there's more options. And I think it's fair to say there's more options than we've seen in the Bielema era, at least on paper. And I think, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, with the starting five, in the Bielema era, is this the most settled the starting five has been in training camp? I was thinking about that. I was thinking about
All right, so
Bart Miller.
2021, there was Palczewski, Kramer, Kendrick Green was gone, right? Yeah.
Correct. He was gone. Low.
And then you had Badovanak.
Who's Badovanak and Blake Jarosati.
Those were the guards, and they were kind of figuring that thing out, right? So you had the tackles in the center.
Killstrom was in that mix at guard as well.
Right. So then
that was not settled.
The next year was pretty settled because Pearl came in and filled in for Lowe. And then you had Alex Poster move to center and shocked us, but he kind of won that job right away, right?
Yeah, I don't even feel like that was a competition into fall camp. I feel like in spring he showed he could do that. He had Palczewski at right tackle.
I mean, last year felt pretty settled. But it didn't end up that way during the season.
It did. Left guard, they really even rotated that a little bit during the season. Injuries probably necessitated some of that, but
I mean, I think
this is more settled than last year.
But they wanted Pearl and Adams next to each other with Josh Kreutz, and then just hope that Chrysler and Geske have it on the right side.
That's right. Yeah, Geske was on the right side to start. Yeah, they
Right.
felt like, yeah, it shouldn't have
It
been
was
as settled
really
as it was.
correct. Like, I do feel like there's more of a competition, but I feel like they are settled into their roles. I think they feel really good about what they have, but you still have to work for that job. Like, there was no question those were the top 5 last year. Like, if one of the starters struggles, especially Geske or Priestley, I think they will be pushed throughout training camp. No doubt Kreutz and Davis and Chrysler are going to start, but those other guys have to keep working to get the job. I don't know if there was anything that would happen in camp that would have changed what they were doing.
That's probably right. I think that's well, yeah. I mean, things did happen in camp. Zach Chrysler missed practice and it didn't change what they were doing. Yeah, maybe last year was more. I guess more. I don't. To me, I just don't see this 5 changing. And last year, you could have convinced me that the right side would have shuffled before that week 1 game. So I don't. I think it's more settled than last year, but maybe I'm probably not giving last year as much credit for being as settled as I should.
All right, Pat, the other side of the line of scrimmage, does the D line have enough to replace what they lost? This is my question of the year. Besides maybe Aaron Henry and the defense as a whole, but defensive line, I mean, you lost Johnny Newton. I'm going to do a story about how do you replace Johnny Newton? And you don't with a certain talent, but they seem to think they have enough depth. They are really high on Dennis Briggs Jr. being a dude. They seem to think he's going to be really good. And if he stays healthy, I think he can because he was productive when he played at Florida State. They are very confident in T-Raw Edwards. I think a lot depends, Joanne. What do they get out of Gentle Hunt, Alex Bray, Jeremiah Warren, uh, Ezekiel Holmes? Just a lot of guys that we just haven't seen compete at this level. I feel some confidence in Briggs and in T-Raw Edwards because I've seen it. I have confidence in the nose tackle position because that's what Terrence Jamison does. And I have a lot of confidence that Terrence Jamison is going to have a competitive defensive line. Just do they have disruptors on the interior? The good thing is you feel good about Gabe Akis and Seth Coleman on the outside of it, right? So if you can get those 2 or 3 players that are rotating in, 4 players to give you solid, tough, good run defense and occasional pass rush, you can do it. But it's one of my biggest questions of the year.
Yeah, what do we mean by replace? I mean, that's kind of how I would think of this, right? Like when we say replace, do you mean hold up to where last season was? Because Johnny Newton was an All-American. But
I will say, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, no,
last year Keith Randolph was not Keith Randolph,
correct.
right? So like the defense,
but Denzel Jackson was better than we thought he would be.
But the defensive line in 2022 was better than 2023. It was
Sure.
more disruptive. Part of that has to do with the secondary that was behind them, but also because Keith Randolph was healthy and Calvin Avery was good. But Johnny Newton was getting single covered all the time and just dominating people. So I do think last year's defensive line was not as good, despite Johnny Newton being the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. It's just you don't have that one guy that I know of yet that can take over games. Can you figure it all out in the aggregate? Can you be as good last year in the aggregate as last year's defensive line? I think that's possible, but how can I bet on it when I haven't seen Dennis Briggs for an entire season stay healthy and be productive. And then Alex Bray and Ezekiel Holmes and all these guys are just question marks until they play games.
Yeah, until we see it, it's hard to say one way or the other. I hesitate to say by losing the guys that you lost that you can replace that. Like those are
right.
Can't replace Johnny Newton. Now, can the defensive line be where you're not losing games because of them? Yeah. I like the pieces they have there in theory to not be like an F on the grading scale, right? Until I see it, I have concerns about replacing the guys that you have to replace. Like even 65% of Keith Randolph was a pretty good football player. Denzel Jackson was better than we thought Denzel Jackson would be. I don't remember at this time a year ago, like this Ohio transfer is going to come in and give himself an NFL shot. Like that just wasn't, at least the way I looked at it. Maybe other people looked at it differently. That's where I would say, like, can you replace that? No, because there's not a Johnny Newton there. Can that still be a productive group? Can that be a group that isn't the reason we sit in a press conference after a 4-8, 5-7 season and say, well, boy, if you had better, the defensive line can be better than that.
Yeah, so I just want to get up the numbers just to kind of compare this because I did this in the defensive line preview. The 2022 defense had more sacks than the 2022 defensive line had more sacks than the 2023 defensive line. So can this group get 10 sacks? Yeah, I think so. For me, it's more about pressures on the interior because you collapse that pocket and force them into Gabe Akis and Seth Coleman. I also have a feeling with Gabe Akis at 275 pounds, we might see him with his hand on the line of scrimmage a little bit.
That's the wild card, right? Is does the defensive front look different? That's kind of the underlying story that, guess what? We can talk about it as much as we want. We're not going to see that until probably Kansas if they do that, right?
Yeah. So my theory for people who haven't heard me say this many times, I expect more 4-man defensive fronts this year. I just do. I just think that's what your talent is. And that means that they have a 3-man based defense, right? Which is Johnny Newton, Keith Randolph, on the 4-eye techniques and 3 techniques. And then you have Denzel Daxton in the middle or Calvin Avery at nose tackle. I expect more of their 4-man front, which we see throughout the seasons, depending on who they play. Like if you're going to have a team that throws it around a little bit more, they usually have more 4-man defensive fronts. But the 2 outside linebackers, Akis and Coleman, and then 2 defensive linemen. So T-Rod Edwards and Dennis Briggs. And then overhang linebacker, whether that's Kenena Odeluga or Daniel Brown, right? Give you another pass rusher, give you somebody who can drop into coverage a little bit more. I just think that gets your best 11 on the field. Now, if you're against a team like Nebraska that now is physical, Joey, maybe you run that 3-man front more often. But if you're going against a team that likes to throw it around like Oregon, I think you can see that 4-man front a little bit more.
I agree. And I don't think we're going to see it against Eastern. Like, I just don't think Brett Bielema, no slight Eastern Illinois, right? But, like, I think you can get by pretending to be something you're not on the defensive front without letting Kansas know.
That's great because Kansas would be the team you'd put like a 4-man front, right? Like that's what you'd want to do against a team with that kind of speed. So, yeah, I think that'd be really interesting to see. It's one of the things I'm most fascinated by. All right, Illini guy 95. Which player do you think will play less than fans seem to think? AKA, who do you think's role is in trouble? The way I think I would go here, and it's no slight to this kid because I think he's going to be really good. I think he could have a huge impact on this offense. But if you're expecting Malik Elzy to be 800 yards this year, I just don't think that's I don't think that's realistic with Zakari Franklin coming in here. I feel better with Zakari coming in. There's less pressure on Malik Elzy. I think he can make a huge impact this year, and that could be Pat Bryant's role last year, 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, something like that. But I don't know if he's going to be like a go-to guy in this offense with Bryant, Zakari Franklin, Caden Fagan, right? I think it's going to be more of a work into his role, potentially start games, and be kind of that Pat Bryant, what he's been the last couple of years.
I like that answer. I wonder how much you would think Josh McCrae. Like, what's the expectation with him? Because look, the reviews for Josh McCrae are really, really positive. Brett Bielema is very excited. Thad Ward was very excited. I think Caden Fagan showed an awful lot last year. And it sounds like Aiden Lawfrey is really – the light is turning on for him. Thad Ward said he's a different player now than he was a year ago. They challenged him to carry a good spring into the summer, into fall, and so far that's been the case. At some point it's going to be like, well, yeah, the handoffs have to go to Caden, right? I mean, and I think Josh McCrae can still have a role. I don't mean to suggest that, like, he's going to go to the bench and you'll never see him again this season, but I'm just really high on Caden Fagan. So I think I would imagine there's going to be a point where you're making a mistake by not giving him the ball. If he's healthy, if he's not tired or whatever, and he's healthy, that guy needs to have the ball because I think he's really, really good.
I think Josh McCrae has a role really great role when you have a lead in the second half.
4-minute offense, man.
I love him. Just when you're trying to do that Wisconsin style, we got a 10, 14-point lead with 10, 15 minutes left. Let's get Josh McCrae the ball, and he's gonna move the chains, right? 3-4 yard cloud of dust, right? Like, I think that's where Josh McCrae can really wear on people. And I can see him having games where it's like, oh, he had 60, 80 yards, and most of it was in the fourth quarter. But in that first and second quarter, I want to get it to my playmakers. And those guys are just playmakers. I think McCrae is a good complementary back. There was times as a freshman, I thought he could be a bell cow. Just haven't seen it because of injuries the last 2 years. So if he is fully healthy, maybe we do see that at some point. Maybe Caden Fagan gets hurt at some point. Josh McCrae becomes a huge part of this offense. But I'm with you. I think early in games, like Fagan and Lawfrey are going to be your go-to playmakers just because they have a little bit more explosiveness to them. Fagan's bigger than Josh McCrae, right? Like, so I just think he's good depth. He's good experience. And I think he's got a role. I don't know if he's that star role, but maybe eventually they'll need him to be that. But that's another good one. I don't know if there's one on defense that I can quote.
That feels pretty settled to me, right outside of the nickel spot. I don't know who,
because Matthew Bailey is going to play. Terrence Brooks is going to start. Dylan
Miles
Rosiak is
Scott.
going to be in the middle of that linebacker position. We know what Seth Coleman and Gabe Akis are, so I don't think there's any surprises there.
No, unless a fan thinks like a Nietzsche Sledge is going to come in and get a ton of snaps.
Right.
Like, and just, I get it, right? Like a transfer comes in, you think immediately the way they've recruited this transfer cycle, those have been a lot of no doubt plug and play guys. The Nietzsche Sledge, I think, is going to play, but it's pretty clear to me that T-Raw has won them over in a big way, and Gentle Hunt's a pretty impressive guy in it.
Yeah. Right Realtor, JoJo Hayden and Daniel Brown. Where are they at on the depth chart? I expect big things from both this year. Daniel Brown, second group, the defense, along with Alec Bryant at outside linebacker. That is the best looking position group. But I expect Daniel can be a little versatile. He played some inside linebacker during the spring. I think he can play that kind of Kanena Odaluga role where when they bring in, I don't know if they call it NASCAR package, but that dime package that, James Kreutz and Kanena Odaluga kind of line up in the B gap and are rushers right up the middle. It can be tough to handle for some offensive linemen, but also off the edge. I think he can kind of be an overhang linebacker. So he's just a really unique piece in that you can kind of line him up all over that second level on the line of scrimmage. And then JoJo Hayden, right now, third string. I think your top three linebackers are pretty clear with Kanena Odaluga, Dylan Rosiak, James Kreutz. They've talked up Malachi Hood here recently as well. Ryan Mead is probably in that second unit, a walk-on who's a veteran. So JoJo Hayden's still developing. I know he's dealt with an injury previously, but still a guy who's developing, but an intriguing piece. Eventually, I think he takes that Kanena Odaluga role.
Yeah, 100% agree on that. Daniel Brown, like saying where he's at in the depth chart, probably misses like that. You say second string, right? But it kind of misses the point that like in some packages, he's first string. I think
he is a sub package guy. Like that's what he's like, a sub package guy where he could end up playing 30, 35 snaps based on those sub packages.
That's right. And so like if you were to print out a depth chart, which I mean we've made depth charts, right? Like he would be second string at outside linebacker, I think. But you would then, if you look at the snap count, like, wait a minute, Daniel Brown played 35 snaps. Well, the way the offense go necessitated him to be out there, and I think there's a lot to like physically with him too, like just his quickness, his versatility. I think he's going to play, and he's going to have a role on this defense.
All right, this is a good one because I think this is one of the more interesting things that we should talk about. Pat, early candidates for the return game need a major upgrade on punt returns. That is for sure. Isaiah Williams was good when he caught the ball, but we know there were some really costly drops there. That's why I think the key is catch the ball. And from what we saw in our first practice, Hank Beatty is the clear front runner for punt returner. Because all I want in the college game, Joey, catch the ball, secure the ball, and let's get our offense on the field.
Wave to everybody in the stands, catch the ball, and don't make a mistake. Right? That and Hank Beatty, I would be shocked if it's not him.
Get Caleb Griffin back here. He was phenomenal at it.
He's a great waver. He's waved with the best of them. Really caught the ball. I would be floored if it wasn't Hank Beatty. He's consistent there. You can fair catch that. And let's be honest, there's been times with ball security when he's taken some pretty big hits on short patterns that have hurt him. You just fair catch, avoid the hit, get the offense out there. Kick return, I don't know though, Jeremy, because I think it's Canary. I think Pat Bryant would be an option, but I think Pat Bryant's very valuable to them offensively. So Wilcher, Lawfrey.
Lawfrey will be back there. Like they like to have a running back there as well, right? So I think Lawfrey's and Wilcher will probably be the guys, but if Wilcher ended up having a huge usage rate, right, offensively, if he's a guy that gets like 60 catches or something like that, and gets some end arounds, do they put Mario Sanders back there? Like that's another guy I think could be an interesting candidate back there. It's just we haven't seen enough of him. But Canary was good there last year. He should have had a kick return touchdown. Should have been the first one since Viangelo if Tip Ryman wouldn't have had that penalty.
Yeah, there's not a lot you can make. If Tip Ryman wouldn't have, that penalty hurt. I mean, for a guy who otherwise didn't hurt you a lot, that one stung.
Yeah. All right, John, with the new interior defensive line and injured linebackers, how does Illinois stop the run And is the Illini defense thin, or is there room for optimism? Just to clear it up, Kreutz is still working his way back. Odeluga is healthy, but they're kind of limiting him early from what we understand. But those guys should be good for the start of the season from what we hear. But I do think the run defense question is fair, right? Like, I do think Brett Bielema's defenses have tended to be really good against the run. I think Terrence Jamison is a really good fundamental teacher with the defensive line. And they got some big dudes. They got some big dudes on that defensive line, but I do think guys like Alex Bray have something to prove there. General Hunt has something to prove there. So they just have to be more consistent. But I don't know if injured linebackers concerns me at all.
No, me either. But I think those guys are going to be super valuable in run defense, right? Like Dylan Rosiak, that's a place that he should thrive. He's not the fastest guy, but he's physical as heck. He should thrive in that.
James an action figure.
Kanina physically is just so freaking impressive.
He's only like 5'11", but dude, he is 240 pounds and just
Kalon Tolson just very much like Kalon Tolson, similar role to Kalon Tolson's. But yeah, they got to stop the run, obviously, and I think the linebackers, just as those defensive linemen kind of get into it, figure themselves out, I think those linebackers are going to have a big hand in that. We'll see. I mean, you're right. Injured linebacker, I don't worry about that. Is the Illinois defense thin? I don't. Maybe on the defensive line in terms of what I think that's fair. I like the depth they're building at linebacker with three guys, as you mentioned, and Rosiak, Odeluga, Kreutz, and then Daniel
outside
Brown
linebacker.
In that mix.
Outside linebacker, they're good. Listen, I know how bad the secondary was. I like the talent in that room. Like, I look at them eye test wise on the defense outside linebacker. The DBs to me are the most physically impressive guys, especially the safeties. Like, look great. Like and then the corners, they got long dudes. It's just, how do they play football? Does the pass rush improve to help those guys? Do they improve with Terrence Brooks in the fold? So I think there's certainly talent in that DB room. They just got to be way better than they were last year, and we'll get into it. But I think there's cause for optimism when it comes to
are they as thin on the whole as last year? I don't think so.
No,
because
defensive line,
behind them last year, though, how much confidence did you have?
Right, because you had Bryce Barnes played a lot, and he played pretty well.
Yeah.
Right, but yeah, once you got to that second unit defensive line, I feel like you have better options there this year with Alex Bray and Gentle Hunt and Ezekiel Holmes and Jeremiah Warren in his second year, but those guys are still improving. So I can't say that that's great, but they have recruited better at that position than they had previously. So, yeah. All right, let's get into Walker, Texas Ranger. Who will be the highest drafted player on this year's roster? This is a fascinating question.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me because it's probably two guys leading the charge here with J.C. Davis and Seth Coleman. Do you have anyone who would?
Yeah, because I don't know, like, what is Pat Bryant's straight line speed? Gabe Akis, could he have a monster year and maybe put himself in there? I don't know, maybe.
I will say I have
Terrence
heard
Brooks
could be in that mix, right? I mean, we'll see. I have heard very positive reviews about how the NFL views Seth Coleman.
Yeah.
Just given his measurables, given his quick twitch, all of that. The question, as we've talked about previously, is consistency with him. But he is squarely on radars as the guy who could be that day two guy. But as someone mentioned to me, they must have not seen some of the other games, right? Like some of those games, the first 6 games of the season, where it just wasn't consistently there. But
he would have been drafted. He would have been drafted in day 3, I think, last year. So
yeah, those flashes are really bright.
Yeah. So I think he'd enter the year kind of in that top 150 prospect range, right? And that could be 3rd round, that could be 5th round. But somewhere in there, I think he would go. I'll go J.C. Davis just because I'm high on him. I'll continue that hype train. I just really like him as a player. And if he becomes more physical and proves himself as a pass blocker at this level, I think you saw what Isaiah Adams was. Like, I feel like J.C. Davis has just as much more athletic talent. Maybe not quite as physical, because not many were more physical than Isaiah Adams. But Isaiah Adams became a 3rd-round pick because he was a really good player under Brett Bielema, and I think that reputation goes a long way in NFL circles. So, but I think we're talking late day 2, early day 3 guys, right?
Yeah, and I think if you want to put a wild card out there, you mentioned I think the names you would think of who could like have that Devin Witherspoon, not to the first round, but the kind of rise that he did, as you mentioned, your Terrence Brooks, your Gabe Akis, your Pat
Yeah.
Bryant. I don't know that I would have anyone else in that conversation as of right now.
No, I think
I mean,
Terrence.
I don't know what to expect of Zakari Franklin, but
Yeah, I think he's a late draftable guy, but I think he's kind of capped with
that's right. Yeah.
what his physical tools. Like, is he a 4.55 guy or 4.6 guy compared to like a 4.4? I don't know, but he's a guy that is draftable. I do think they have a handful of guys that are definitely going to be draft prospects going into next season. Zach Chrysler is probably a guy that we should
He is.
mention.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to. Oh, this is a great one. Football Focus. Does Lane Hansen have any competition at long snapper, or can we pencil him in as the starter already? I need to look. I didn't look in our first practice, Joey, of whether
You
Lane
mess
Hansen
up.
was the only guy snapping the ball, but I think he was last year, right? With Aiden Hall gone, I
I
think
think
Lane
so.
Hansen was the full-time guy. So I think he's the guy, but we'll have to follow up on that. This is a failure on our part.
Yeah, we really messed up. Robbie Disher is somewhere thinking like, you know what? No one's asking about the long snappers. Robbie Disher. Hey, put that question back up real quick, Jeremy,
Yeah.
please. If you're watching this on YouTube, I just want to give a shout out to our guy who asked this, the at Illini Football. He does really good stuff with graphics and deep dives on Twitter. It's really worth a follow for you, honestly, if you want to get into some of that stuff that maybe gets lost in our day to day, but they really do a great job of putting that in there. And I think it's the same person who runs the Hoop Informatics account on Twitter, and just really worth your time if that's what you're into.
I do want to mention, I think I could say this. Like, every time we're at a prospect camp for Illinois, Robbie Disher comes up and goes, "Hey, I got 5 long snappers coming up here. You want to do a story on each one of those guys? We'll get all the hits for you." So,
love something like Robbie Disher loves special teams.
God, he loves it. He really does love it. Hi, hello, 24/7. Hi, hello. Been a while for you, but a favorite bar before a game in Champaign. Joey and I are hitting up bars before a game in Champaign. We got issues. We got real issues, but I mean, I'm the biggest Seven Saints fan, so that would be my go-to. But if like you're going to a game, probably like a Tumble In or a
Illini in
Murphy's, probably my
Murphy's.
go-to on campus.
That's all past my prime. Yeah, we don't do before the game stuff, obviously. In fact, I enjoy sitting on my couch before the game. But park me at Esquire any day, not working, and I will stand for that all day.
All right, these are more big picture. And I think this is a good way to kind of wrap some of these up. And then we got a couple schedule questions as well. Wrestling Realist. What are 3 reasons to be bullish on the Illini reaching a bowl this season? And what are 3 reasons to doubt the Illini reaching a bowl this season? Which is great, Joey, because I covered this in my 7 Thoughts piece here recently. I think one of the biggest reasons to be bullish.
We trade back and forth.
Yeah, I'll go first. I think I'll do 2 of them here. The secondary will be better and the run game will be better. The secondary has to be better, but also Xavier Scott and Miles Scott return for their second years as starters after solid 2 good seasons last year. Terrence Brooks is an upgrade. Tory Cox is a depth upgrade for them. And then Matthew Bailey returns. So I think the secondary is definitely going to be better. Plus, I think Corey Parker is an upgrade on the coaching staff just because of his experience in his resume. And the players seem to really enjoy him so far. The other one for me would be, I think the running game is going to be better because I believe in Caden Fagan. I believe Aiden Lawfrey will be an impact player. And I think the offensive line will get better this season. So those are 2 of the main reasons, because they did not run the ball well enough last year to help Luke Altmaier in that passing game. And we know all the issues they had in the secondary.
All right, so I'll go one last to be bullish and then one to be concerned. Last one to be bullish is Luke Altmaier is a returning quarterback. And talking to him today, I'd really encourage anyone to watch the video of him. He's always been really good with us, always very reflective about everything. But he sounded different. That you were kind of up closer recording video, and I was in the back listening. And I remember thinking, like, man, he's got to fight. Adversity is going to hit. He's going to have to figure that out. But he sounds like a guy who just is different than he was a year ago. He's more confident. He was really open about discussing his confidence and kind of that letting it rip mentality that I think held him back last year. He's obviously familiar with Barry Lunney's offense. They built around him. They gave him weapons to be successful. And I think that's going to pay off. So I'm high on what he can do I'm high on how he can use his legs to make things a problem for defenses. I think he showed a lot in those 6 games. I know I mentioned it again, but those middle 6 sometimes get overlooked when talking about Luke Altmaier's 2023, but they were good. They showed a lot of room for growth with him. And I think it's time to believe in this offense, this passing offense.
Yeah, he's got to show the stuff this fall, but I think he's saying all the right things. And I think his mental approach is phenomenal to hear about. And I totally agree with you. Go and listen to the interviews, and we'll have stories on all of this. But I think going through that is only going to make him better. You wish you had one more year, Tommy DeVito, where he didn't have to have those growing pains, but we knew he'd have growing pains because he just hasn't been through this stuff before. And when you get your butt kicked by Penn State because your offensive line can't protect you against a really talented team that had Chop Robinson and Abdul Carter and all these guys, and then you throw 4 interceptions because you're just trying to do too much. You're trying to carry your team. That's gonna impact you. And while he was way better and more efficient, there were still times he didn't pull the trigger. There were times he held on to the ball too long instead of getting rid of it and missed a guy down the field because he just was terrified of making a mistake. And those are things you got to learn of, like, what's the balance? How do I be, cautiously aggressive, if that's a word or a phrase that we could use? Because at some point your team needs you to make plays and needs you to be confident in your ability. And there were just times last year, it's like, can he make that next step? And you just saw when John Paddock came in, that guy was in effort mode. He's like, this is the last chance I'm ever going to have. And I see it, I'm going to throw it. Right. And I'm going to trust my guy to go up and make a play. And Casey Washington did that. And Isaiah Williams did that. I think there was something, even though Luke will tell you, that sucked. That sucked sitting those last 3 games. But I think he handled it well as you can. I think he learned from it. So I think that experience should only make him better. And it's the experience most quarterbacks have to go through. He was a first-time starter, but you did see the playmaking ability. You saw the talent there. And players have to know they have a guy who can make plays, and Luke showed that. But now if you can get that confidence and that processing ability to improve, just like your boy Jordan Love, Joey, like what he was early on in the season as a starter, looked like one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the league early on. And then
take it easy.
But at the end of the year,
yeah,
I would have taken maybe 2 or 3 quarterbacks over him with the way he was playing over at the end of the year. I'm not saying Luke Altmaier will do that, but I think that natural progression and natural experience is the biggest teacher.
That's right. So 3 reasons to doubt. I'll start, Jeremy, and I'll let you take the final 2.
Can I add one more?
Yep, you can.
Brett Bielema went and got dudes in the portal.
Fact. Yeah.
If you would have asked me January or February 2024, what am I projecting this team? I wouldn't have had them as a bowl team. Now I'm much more likely after they've added Terrence Brooks, Zakari Franklin. Of course, they added Cole Rusk and defensive linemen like Dennis Briggs and offensive linemen like J.C. Davis and all those guys. But adding those difference makers, adding another defensive lineman, adding another DB, I think helped a lot. But getting J.C. Davis and Terrence Brooks and Zakari Franklin, that's the kind of talent they need to elevate. So go ahead.
So is this the last off season? We do are they going to be active in the portal conversation? Because it's clear to me that they're not portal averse, right? Like it was always quarterback, but then it was a lot of depth pieces. It's clear to me that they're cool to bring in, no doubt, starters. And it's why there's not a lot of starting depth chart questions in our brains right now.
And just like under Lovey, I gave Lovey a lot of credit for going in transfers because that's how he could elevate his talent base the most. Now you got to go get the right guys, but we saw what some of those guys could do, like Olo Batiku and the Joshi Mator-Bebe. Like maybe you can get your 4-star, 5-star guys in the portal and continue to build up with the 3 stars and some 4 stars in prep recruiting. But transfer portal, that's where you might be able to get more 4-star NFL caliber talent, just on the back end, just because that's how they buy in more to your development than a brand or this amount of wins.
Yeah, and you probably built that relationship early, a couple of years prior to when that comes back around. Can the defensive line hold up? Is there enough there to make that a neutral or even a slight positive, or I guess you could even say, maybe a slight negative, but not a total mess? I think there is, but I do wonder if an injury hit. Dennis Briggs has had injury issues. If Alex Bray isn't as ready for those big snaps, those big moments, if T-Raw Edwards maybe isn't everything that we've heard that he is, if that backtracks, do you have enough depth there to survive something going wrong in your starting group? Like that would be a question for me. I know defense, like I'm not alone. A lot of people have questions about the defensive line and if over the course of 12 games it can be what they need it to be.
Yeah. I think you got to bring it up defensively. Aaron Henry, second year as coordinator. I think we got questions about him. And I think all those questions are fair. It's interesting hearing from like Miles Scott, talked to him yesterday, like, and he's talked about how Aaron is a little bit different, maybe a little bit more confidence, maybe even more vocal in his leadership role. But this is a big year for him to kind of prove himself. And I think just like Luke Altmaier in his first year, I think he'll learn from that. But they also surround him with different coaches. Bielema saw that maybe I need to put more different coaches around him to help him succeed. It's a huge year for that. So I think there's a coordinator question there. I would also add that outside of the defensive line, and the schedule would certainly be one with the Big Ten that you're in. Can Illinois just stop losing on the margins? Can they just stop losing these games by turnovers or penalties? You know, these ridiculous things that happen against Northwestern. You got to stop losing games that way. Now they won on the margin. I mean, Toledo, they probably shouldn't have won that game, right? Except for Miles Scott's, pick six and Luke Altmaier to Casey Washington late. Maryland, they come back and win. Minnesota. So maybe they kind of evened out last year, but you think of the Brett Bielema era and the close losses that they've had, and you got to be able to win those. So in that fourth quarter, you got to make the plays like you did against Maryland, like you did against Minnesota that make the difference in games and not just shoot yourself in the foot. Last year, they shot themselves in the foot so much, penalties, special teams errors, all those things. So that's the biggest thing for me because they're going to be in a lot of close games. I think we know Brett Bielema is going to have competitive teams, but you got to find a way to win those close games. And that's where you hope that experience in the secondary, the offensive line, quarterback position really helps you out.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I like the additions they've made. Like if you were to say, like, okay, like you were to combat some of those doubts, it would be, I do like some of the additions on the defensive line. I do like Aaron Henry entering his second year. I do like kind of that chip that Brett Bielema's referenced these guys wearing. And I know T.Y. Edwards brought it up the other day, like that's shoot at him. So like there's just like you could point flaws in all of our positives, right? Like you can combat some of those negatives.
We do got to mention the schedule.
I'm more bullish. Yeah, we do. I know that's coming up. I'm just saying I'm more bullish than not about this team after November.
Yeah, I'm still kind of like even. I'm still kind of like, hey, if you want to buy in, you can. Like there might be a path to 8 wins. If you want to buy into, hey, there's a 4-win team, I can see that because they still got to prove it on the field. And I love that Josh Kreutz said that today. Say, hey, we got to show it on the field at some point. But I think these guys are motivated by what happened last year, but there's still a talent question when you're comparing it to the rest of the Big Ten. Like, can you go to Oregon and win? It's going to be really tough. Can you beat Michigan at home? I think that's going to be really tough. But there will be a lot of pomp and circumstance about that game. Can you go to Penn State and win? I know they did a couple years ago, but it's going to be really tough. So it's just going to be a lot of toss-up games, and they got to win more of them than they lose, right? Because you got 2 games you need to win. There's 3 games people expect you to lose. So you got to win, 4 of those other 7. You got to win 4 of those other 7. So for me, they still got to prove that they can do that because last year came out of the gate slow. Then you end it with a thud, even though you had that great stretch of what should have been 4 wins in 4 games if they didn't blow the Wisconsin one. But that Wisconsin game, that Northwestern game, the Iowa game, those all just stick in your craw.
Yeah, they do. And you can pick games like that for every year so far, right? It's the downfall of being in those competitive games is those, like, I wrote this in the mailbag. There's been 2 games that I can remember that Illinois really just got totally beat during Bielema's tenure. It's Virginia in 2021 and Wisconsin in 2021. What other game during his tenure were you like, nah, this game was over entering the fourth quarter? I don't remember, unless I'm missing.
Well, you got 2 last year. Purdue was just a complete downfall in the second half. But it was a game at halftime, and you weren't playing well, right? So that one in Nebraska were the most disappointing games to me. But you had all these other teams that felt like on the ropes, and you just weren't able to knock them out. That's where I think those are the Nebraska and Purdue still to me are like, what happened? Like what happened in those games? But the ones that you just lost by 2 points at the end or lost to Wisconsin the way you did. Those ones really, really sting because you think of what could have been. But yeah, they are competitive. They are competitive, but they're 7-10 in these one score games. They got to turn that to a winning percentage, right? They have to win more of those now than they lose. Let's get to Ted. He says, if all players hit their individual ceilings, which is very unlikely, then what do you project the record to be at the end of the year? If everyone hit their individual ceilings, Joey, this would be like a 9-win team. I think there's enough talent to do that, but that's probably not going to happen. Injuries happen, or players don't progress linearly. So I do think against the this schedule, I still think they can potentially win 9 games, but I'm not going to project this team to win 8 or 9 games. Most likely, I'm probably going to have them closer to around 500.
Yeah, I would look in that 6 to 7 window. Like that's where I'm kind of really. You could even like assuming they all hit. I'm looking at 6 to 7 or 80% of the guys hit. Whatever the case is, like that's kind of where I fall. I mean, and with the caveat, like 5 is possible too. 5 is right. Like there's not a big margin to me between 5 and 7 wins. Yeah. That is.
I'm just saying the best case scenario for this team, I think that's what this question is 9 wins or something like that. I think the worst case scenario would be like 3, but I think the real spectrum for this team is somewhere between 4 and 8. And I would be shocked if this team doesn't win between 5 and 7. Like that's
where I like. Yes. That's the best way to put it.
Also, he says, as a writer, what's the emotion you feel before the season?
Finally, right? Like that's just part of it. Like basketball recruiting takes us into June, and then June takes us into official. Then it's like nothing's really going on in July, but how are we going to tell people who give us their hard-earned money that nothing's going on and we'll catch you in a month? So like you're kind of just like going over everything, and then you're rehashing some quotes, and you're just finally to see it. Like there's less like, well, it could be this or it could be that or it won't be this. You just finally have it, and it's just you're constantly thinking, and there's constant interest because something's happening. Yeah. And also traveling's fun.
Yeah. Well, January through like June now is basically like, all right, who you adding to this roster? Like that's basically roster building time with spring ball in the middle of it. And, we talk to these guys, we get to learn a little bit more about them, but it's more like, hey, what are you learning from last year? What's your goals going into the off season? Then we kind of hit July and we do our position primers. And for me, it's a good reset of what we have, like what Illinois has on the roster, what we think about these pieces, what needs to happen for them to be successful. And then August for us is really getting to know these guys again and how it's all gelling and what these players have to say about their growth and all that. And I think it gets people hyped because they're thinking about what could be, right? And even though we might write with a skeptical eye, there's hope. Everyone's got hope in the off season, but then September's like, okay, what do you got? That's what's exciting for me, because by the end of this month, I'm just like, I am sick of writing about what could be. I want to write about what is. And that's the fun about Eastern Illinois. We'll get to learn a little bit about the team, but against Kansas, we're really going to get to know a lot about the team. Central Michigan might learn a little bit about the team. And if you're 3-0, people are going to be pumped. But then the rest of that schedule at Nebraska, you're going to learn a hell of a lot about this team. So September, we're going to learn a hell of a lot. And then October is going to be about how do they manage this intense October schedule? And then November is, do they have a chance at a bowl game? That's how I look at the season.
100%. It's just nice to see football, talk about football without like just a constant talking season, right? Like guessing, talking, projecting.
And I think Joey and I am skeptical, but I'm usually like a cautious optimist. That's how I live my life. I don't love living my life like, just thinking the worst is going to happen. That's not how I report. I like to let you guys know about what your team is, what it could be, what are the downsides, what are the upsides. So I try to stay steady through all of that. But we're also football fans and we're excited. Like I like watching football games. There was a lot of my time covering Illinois, I didn't get all that excited about watching football games because it's like, oh, there's a 30-point blowout happening. Now I expect competitive games a lot. And it's a big year for the trajectory of Illinois football and Brett Bielema's program. So, yeah, I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the stories we get to tell, the games we get to go see, the venues we get to be at. So, yeah, there's certainly a lot of excitement from us. We do this because we're fans of the game and fans of doing what we do.
Yeah, you're gonna laugh me out of the room when I say like I tend to be more glass half full than
Yeah,
not.
you are. You
And
like to act like
like
you're not.
yeah, I mean, there are some things where I'm maybe more cranky than more anyone else should
Like your
be about.
Packers and
But
Cardinals, you're a little bit more glass half empty,
yeah,
even though
but
you
like that's the
shouldn't be.
thing is like that's where I funnel that sports energy and sports fandom into are those things. But for the most part, like I am a glass half full guy within reason. Right? Like this season, of course, I do think this is a bowl team because I think there's talent there, and I'm not going to default to like well, it's Illinois football. Of course, it's going to be 4-8 or 5. Like that's not no one. That's just not how I go about things. I think there's enough there to make me think that this could be a bowl team with the
Yeah.
way they've added it. So like, yeah, I don't like going into seasons thinking like, oh God, by November, who's going to care? This is going to be a drag. No one wants to. That's not fun for us. It's fun when people are interacting in pods after games or our message boards are going and people care about a program. And that's probably the thing that Brett Bielema has done best here is put this program in a position where people give a damn about it
Mhm.
in November. There's value to that because that has not, Jeremy, you've done this. This is my 7th year. That has not been the case. Usually it's like October 15th and people are like, hey, think there's like, is oven open at all? Do you think you could slide over to like, that's what it is. And people care now. Like, is there a heightened frustration with being in those margins? Of course, that's fandom. But it beats the hell out of someone being like, I don't care. I don't want to read anything about football because it doesn't matter to me because this team's got 2 wins with 3 to go. Like it doesn't, that's not fun. That's not why we get into this is to just help piss people off because their team stinks. They don't want to read about it.
Yeah, and I don't try to sell false hope. Like I really don't. Like we talked about, I think this team's probably between a 5 and a 7 win team. But like I don't think this is. I don't go into the season thinking, oh, Illinois is going 0-9 in the Big Ten. Like I just I don't think that's a reality, and I don't think Brett Bielema has
Here's the
shown
thing.
his program to be that. Like despite the frustration of being so close in year 1 and year 3 to a bowl game and missing out by 1 game, and despite the frustration of being 7-1 and not making the Big Ten championship game and winning the Big Ten West when it was sitting right there, like that frustration, like it's because you were so close. It's because you're competitive and you should want more. But with Brett Bielema, that's possible, right? So like you are so close to having one of the best 3-year runs and not getting it. Yeah, it's so Illinois. I get it. But I don't think that's written. Like I think the floor has been raised. And I think you should expect this team to make a bowl game. That should be based on their roster, based on their coaching staff, based on the progress they've made. Now let's see if they can do it.
Absolutely. Fan apathy is the worst thing that can happen to a program. It's bad for us business wise. And I think the way this program has been competitive, that is starting to weed out, at least as the month turns to November, in the middle of November.
All right, just a few more on the schedule. Campbell asks, of the toss-up games, which game is most important for the Illini to win? I'd say Nebraska, but interested in your thoughts. Go ahead,
Kansas.
Joey.
It's Kansas.
Give me
You're
the
at
reasons.
home. You're at home. You lost to them last year. This is a team that should be on a similar rebuilding pattern as you. Obviously, Lance Leipold's got this further along right now in terms of wins and losses in postseason. But if you can beat Kansas at home, which shouldn't really be out of the realm of possibility with where this program is, I know how good Kansas is. They're going to be a fringe top 25 team, if not in the top 25 when they come to town. They've got a quarterback who's all world. Everyone loves Jalen Daniels and what he can do. But if you can get that one, there is literal tangible growth from where you were a year ago to what you did this year against this team. And then you got Central Michigan. And all of a sudden, you're looking at the possibility of being 3-0, assuming they beat Eastern Illinois, which, again, let's just make that assumption. Otherwise, there's bigger problems ahead. Then you go to Nebraska with a possible 3-0 team. Like now you can make some noise here. Now you've got interest of either national people, of voters, of fans who are kind of, I don't know. Like that is a really, really big game. It's not going to define the season, but it can give you a bunch of gas going into October.
I might go as far to say it could define the season, Joey, because you know where it would define the season? In season ticket sales, or ticket sales, I should say. And you know what Illinois needs? Butts in the seats. Like they need butts in the seats. And there's kind of a wait and see approach. But if they beat Kansas at home in prime time on national television, then I think you're thinking, oh my gosh, maybe Illinois could win 7 or 8 games this year. Now they have to follow that up, right? And boy, that next rest of the month would set them up well with Central Michigan and a toss-up game at Nebraska, which won't be easy. But I do think those 2 games are what stand out to me because of early in the season and what is awaiting you in October with Michigan and Penn State and Oregon. Like that is a murderer's row in the Big Ten. 3 of the top 4 teams potentially in the Big Ten. Like you got to make some hay early and late on the schedule, just based on the reality of what your opponents are in October. So you do not want to go into that Purdue game at 2-2 and needing that game, right? Or they got Penn State. I forgot how it goes, but it's Purdue week 6. But that Purdue game, you don't want to be 500 or below, because that becomes a must-win game. Like if you can go into that game with 3-4 wins, I think you're feeling good about what you can do in November and getting back to a bowl game. So for me, like, yeah, Kansas is going to be a really difficult opponent, but you should have a pretty pumped up crowd that's willing to give this team a chance. And you got a second-year quarterback. You got what you think is an improved offensive line after what was a disaster in Lawrence last year on the offensive line. And for Aaron Henry, I think it's a big game. Like that's game like, okay, last year, let's flush that. We're a better defense. Can you show it? Because that's a huge task. But Andy Kotelnicki is not in the opposing press box either. So I think him being at Penn State now and leaving Kansas is significant. So I think it's a tone-setting game of the season, both for this program, but also the fan base. Like if you get this fan base bought in, you get more people in the stadium. Illinois doesn't have a big home field advantage, but if you do start 4-0 or something like that, Joey, I think you could have a pretty pumped up home crowd in October, especially for that Michigan game, and then November when you got 2 big home games.
Yeah, and again, it's 2 exact points of the season, and you can show how much. If you're that much better, and they believe they're better, you've got a chance to show it against. And look, Jalen Daniels, the top 2 quarterbacks are going to see all year, right? I think him and Dylan Gabriel are the 2 best quarterbacks they're going to see this year, and Drew Aller's probably not very far behind in that conversation. It's a good chance, man. Like you got an exact chance to show how much better you are than a year ago against the same quarterback, against a team that is probably closer in the final score, although maybe not all that much from Lawrence.
Yeah. It's at Nebraska, then at Penn State, then Purdue at home after a bye week on October 12th. So I guess Penn State is in September technically, but that 3 games in 4, 3 or 4 games against Penn State, Michigan, and Oregon. You want to set yourself up well. So getting a 3-1 is really important. But if you can be 3-0 and beat Kansas, I think this fan base will be pumped up. DPY, last one we'll do, Joey. What do the Illini have to do to have a viable shot at an Oregon and or Penn State win? For me, it's easy. It's turnover margin. You want an upset, you got to win the turnover margin. I don't think they did that actually at Penn State a couple of years ago. I think they turned it over.
They ran the heck out of the ball at Penn State.
But they ran the heck out of it. But you go and win the turnover battle. It's probably the thing we don't talk enough about last year is just how much that flipped. Like Illinois went from a team that led the country in takeaways, didn't turn the ball over, one of the best in turnover margin. Then last year, one of the worst at taking the ball away outside of Dylan Rosiak with his forced fumbles. And they turned over the ball a lot. So special teams, offense, all of it. That's got to flip. Like that has to flip. That's a huge reason between the discrepancy of wins and losses last 2 years.
Yeah, you've got to force them into turnovers. That's not going to be easy because those are 2 of the 3 bets, right? If you take out Daniels, like the forcing turnovers from those guys is going to be a challenge because they're really talented quarterbacks and they're highly thought of in college football and beyond. So maybe you need Dylan Rosiak to punch something out, right? Like if you're going to pull something like that, you kind of similar like Jake Hansen forcing the fumble against Jonathan Taylor in 2019. Like you might need a moment like that again. Yeah, it's turnover and you don't beat yourself. Run the ball. Like that's the games that they've been in. They've really kind of won games you think maybe they shouldn't. If I'm not mistaken, they've run the ball pretty well in those football games. You think back to Penn State in 2019, you think back to 2021, you think back to Purdue that year. They didn't win that. They did. Yeah. No, they lost.
McCrae. Yeah, they lost them.
Game. They should have won that game. They run the ball. That's what they've got to do. Control the clock, control the tempo, play your game. But to your point, yeah, force the turnover is the big one.
All right, this is good. I like taking other people's questions. They got to produce this for the day. We didn't have to do a lot of work other than just give the thoughts that we had on them. So I enjoy this. Maybe we'll do this a little bit later, maybe the bye week or something like that. But anything else you want to add before we get out of here, Joey?
No, there was something I was going to ask you about before. This is an hour ago at this point in time. I thought we were gonna discuss this, and I got nothing.
Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, offensive line. Just trying to get your head going here.
No, I feel like I came off a little harsh on the defensive line. I just have questions. I think there's talent
For
there.
sure.
Just don't. You just can't let that be just a mess, and I don't think it will be. But if it does veer that way, then like that's where I think problems are going to crop up.
I think it's fair to say, like, this defensive line does not have the proven talent or the pedigree of talent outside of Dennis Briggs, right, to be a top half Big Ten group. That means the rest of the defense has to be far better. Like, the rest of the defense has to upgrade their game. Like, Dennis Briggs is what? The only 4-star prospect, high school prospect out of this group? That doesn't mean Alex Bray won't be good. It doesn't mean General Hunt won't be good. But Dennis Briggs, I believe, is the only one out of the guys we expect to play. Like, Eddie Turk was close to a 4-star. I think he was a 4-star in Rivals, but he's not going to play a big role this year.
No, I think that's right. I do want to say, idea for next pod, player on each side of the ball we're highest on going into 2024. I don't know if we want to do that now at a minute 11, but let's tease the or an hour 11. But let's tease that for our next gathering here after the position previews.
One of my next ones was like the most intriguing guys of training camp. So we'll do that next week. How about that? And you can take who you're highest on and all that. Does that work?
Sounds great to me.
All right, it's an hour and 11 in here. Let's get out of here. Thank you for listening to the Illini Inquirer Podcast. Thank you for all you who sent the questions. We appreciate that. Hope you had fun with this one. Give us a like if you're on our YouTube channel. We appreciate you guys. Subscribe to us. Hit that notifications bell as well. And if you're listening on the podcast, give us a follow, rating, review, wherever you get your podcast. Keep up with everything training camp at IlliniInquirer.com. And we got 60% off sale for your first time. If you're a VIP, if you're not a VIP, sign up for that 60% off deal. It's a great time to sign up, $70 savings. But everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer Podcast.